So this is a team of people working on the project. It's a collaboration between the Science Museum Group, which is 5 museums, Science Museum London, National Railway Museum York, Science and Media Museum Bradford, Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, and Locomotion, which is in Shildon, County Durham. It's then also a partnership with the School of Advanced Study at the University of London and the Victoria and Albert Museum. My neighbours over the road. So this is our kind of master research question. How can existing digital tools and methods be used to build relationships at scale between poorly and inconsistently catalogued digitized collection objects and other content sources? I think probably the 2 things to pick out here, one of which is at scale, which is, so it's less about creating a handcrafted set of links and knowledge, but using machine learning to do that at scale. So rather than saying we're building something sort of small and perfect, we're building something large and imperfect, and then starting to explore what are the possibilities and affordances of that. And I think the other key point is we're largely using existing digital tools and methods, so we're not extensively building new digital technologies. We're taking lots of existing things and applying them in different ways. So we're at the Science Museum Group, we're undertaking a very large digitization project. So we're taking our collection from being about 5% digitized to about 60%. So we're adding a couple of 100,000 records online. But as with most collection data or collection catalogues, it's largely unstructured. It's quite variable in consistency, and it's overwhelmingly composed of really quite thin records. Which means that the kind of potential for new forms of research and access and scholarly inquiry across that collection and multiple collections it remains quite dormant. So this is a kind of typical record in our museum. And there are, as you can see, some level of structured information. I've deliberately chosen quite a thin record here. There are others that are better, and there are probably others that are less good. So quite often the solution to kind of improving the catalogue and doing more sophisticated things with it is, falls to doing more extensive cataloguing, and that requires like really very, very deep curatorial expertise. And obviously that work is ongoing and it is prioritized, but it's the work of decades and not years for the most part. And so a lot of the ambitions that one might have around new forms of discovery and exploration of the catalogues remains kind of beyond our reach. So things like rich browsing tools, looking at kind of thematic entry points, trying to grasp the whole of collections and how big they are, is something that for the most part museums aren't able to do. Or there's been a number of like really interesting demonstrators done on different collections around the world. We had a webinar about 9 months ago, and one of the things that came out of a poll in that webinar was the extent to which a major hurdle for building the kinds of things that we're building was time, resources, and the large amount of work required, which is why fundamentally what we end up with is collection catalogues that look like this. So records for objects largely sit in isolation from each other. There are some linkages with people and companies and organizations, but for the most part, it's very, very thin. Search remains, or keyword search remains, the primary discovery paradigm across the cultural heritage sector, and search should be obvious, is primarily driven by data. And joining collections together, so searching across multiple collections or bringing multiple collections together is very complicated because the individual catalogues have been constructed in different ways at different institutions, often over like decades. And so bringing collections together can be very, very labor intensive. And it can often be kind of a tiny bit reductive because you're trying to get 2 data sets and sort of like push them together, and the ways that fields are used and even the existence of different fields in the catalogue may or may not align neatly. mostly not. So this is our project. In practice, what we're doing is looking at 3 different areas, and I'll dig into them a little bit each quite briefly, and then you'll see more in the next couple of hours. So in practice, what we're doing is using a bunch of different technologies, including named entity extraction and entity linking, to find similar and identical things across collections and with external data sources, primarily Wikidata, and we're attempting to do that at scale, so across tens and hundreds of thousands of records, rather than just picking out a handful as a kind of case study. So we'll talk a bit about what some of those jargony words mean next, and also through the course of the morning. So in terms of knowledge graphs and linked data, this is traditionally how, well, this is like how almost all collection catalogs are stored. There are kind of tables underpinning the collection management system, whichever one you're using. Underneath, there are sort of tables that hold information for people or organizations and objects, and they hold different pieces of information, and then those tables are linked to each other. So on one level, it's quite good for managing a collection, administering loans, putting things on display, conservation, and so on, because it's as an inventory management tool, it works quite well. Once you start to put the collection online, again, it works pretty well up to a certain level, but what it isn't is very, very flexible. So it's quite hard to add new things to a data structure like this, and it's quite hard to like interrogate across and through these kinds of structures within one collection, but definitely across multiple collections. So what we're looking at is a more of a knowledge graph based approach. And so knowledge graphs are very broadly used through things like Pinterest or Google search, or Facebook, obviously, as a social network graph, or Netflix. Are all under the surface. They're kind of machine learning generated knowledge graphs. And okay, so what do knowledge graphs do well? So think of it as a kind of different shape of database. So what do they do well? They handle complex relationships very well, because they can expand out and have dimensions which are quite hard to add to an existing structure. They can hold lots of different kinds of relationships, so they can go more broad than a traditional collection management system. They're quite efficient at calculating relationships between things, so you can start to cluster things together and see closeness between interrelated things. And then they're good at bridging across different kinds of content, so they're quite good at merging data sets together and then inferring new relationships, and they're very flexible and they grow very easily. So I think you should think of a knowledge graph as a very flexible way to extend a collection catalog in all kinds of ways, and then store new and different kinds of relationships. And then key to us in this project is they're also machine readable. So if you structure the information in the right way, so the arrows in the top right-hand corner can be created in such a way that computers can analyze those things and can search through them. So you can look at all the kinds of relationships that are birthplace or are founders and so on. And you can make those kinds of inquiries much more efficiently and quickly than you can in a traditional data set. So the other thing that we're doing is linking the collection catalog to Wikidata. So this is Wikipedia. I'm sure we're all familiar with it. On the right-hand side there, you can see there's like a panel which is driven by Wikidata. So the main like central column, which is kind of prose, is like handwritten text. There are paragraphs, there are links, and so on. But the one on the right-hand side is coming from a data set which is called Wikidata. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, I don't know if I can point with my arrow. No, I can't. In the left-hand side under tools at the very bottom, you can see something that says Wikidata writing. So underpinning this record of this company are all the facts associated with it. This is quite a rich one. So if you scroll down the page on the right-hand side, you can see all kinds of pieces of data. And then even at the bottom of the page, there's then all this stuff. So you can see that if we were to link our General Electric objects to this Wikidata record, we'd suddenly have access to really a very rich set of data. it's also a couple of other things about Wikidata. It's released as open data, which means that we can work with it very easily. It's multilingual, and it has links on to other places. So it will often include identifiers for, so it might include a Science Museum group identifier, but it might also include identifiers to the V&A or Art UK or various thesauruses. So it means that we can use it, we can draw that information in, and we can sort of move through it and start to really enrich our existing data set. So this is what a Wikidata entry looks like. This is like the human readable version, but there's like a machine readable version. So fundamentally underneath that right-hand panel and that panel at the bottom, these are all the bits of data. You can see that they're editable. Actually, there you can see there's a couple of foreign language versions. So what we'll move from is being able to have these kind of small islands of data in our collection to being able to link them to Wikidata, which then means we can move on to other things and draw that information and use it in our knowledge graph. So then how are we building this knowledge graph? And you'll hear a bit more about this in just before the lunch break, sorry, tea break. We're using a kind of number of different techniques to kind of process existing identifiers. So in our collection management system, there are some existing external URLs, and we can use those. We're adding new links to Wikidata using machine learning, and we're from the kind of controlled fields in our data catalog database. And then we're also working through the description text, because often within the kind of prose, the object description, there's all kinds of useful things in there which don't exist in the actual formal fields of the catalog, but do exist within some prose. So this is another object from our collection, and we can identify within this text here at the bottom some of the things that we might want to pull out and add to our knowledge graph. So you can see that lots of, here immediately, and this is actually quite an early pass at this, but you can see lots of things here, some of which exist in our catalog as within controlled fields, but lots of them are free text in this free text area. So we can pull them out and we can link them both to within our own catalog, but also to Wikidata. And so that Soyuz 11 in the bottom right hand corner, the Wikidata entry includes all the astronauts that went on that, where it took off from, where it landed. So we then end up with a kind of a richer data set where we can move through the Wikidata and start to pull in from our objects through Wikidata into other things. So what kinds of things are the kind of things that we can usefully use this for? So we can improve collection catalog interfaces, so new kinds of features and functionality. We can improve discovery, because suddenly we've got a whole bunch more searchable things, and we can add links to other data sources, so our objects things feel less like an end in themselves on our website and more like the starting point of a journey. So in summary, this is our collection as it is now. We're connecting it up to Wikidata. Through that, we can attach onto other things. We can then we're then building within the data set, putting related items together, which might not within our current catalog setup be linked to each other. And then we can start to kind of cluster things together. So there are some sort of themes and categories in our collection, but they're very kind of internal focused. Some of them are great, and some of them are kind of legacies of just the way that the catalog was structured in the past. But we can start to kind of group things together using this data set to start to kind of pull together objects and people and companies in a way that with our current catalog would kind of be impossible. So what are the benefits? The human resources to do this kind of work are very limited, and especially the expert ones, which you'd need. We can start to introduce new topics and themes that are not contained in the current catalog. We can enrich specific types of records with additional data pulled in from Wikidata or elsewhere. We can stop our record pages becoming kind of dead ends and turn them more into like the starting point of a journey. And we can use those data sets to create new forms of research and discovery. And then lastly, the things that we're going to sort of explore and working on next, this project runs until the autumn. We're looking at what kinds of levels of data and what forms of data, which aren't perfect or good enough to be useful. And this kind of good enough point is really important because, you know, in a sense, a set of Google search results aren't perfect, but they're good enough. You can usefully use them. We're looking at what kinds of techniques are best to build and new relationships and group these things again at scale. We're exploring how like confidence levels in these relationships might impact on their usefulness. So if we could put a kind of score against the computer thinks this is highly likely to be a great link versus this is a kind of maybe, but if it's useful to you, then so much the better. We're looking at where best to put human input into supporting such approaches. So I think one of the things that is emerged very quickly was if there's any link to any kind of external data in your catalog that you can build on top of, you can get a lot of mileage out of that quite quickly. And then, of course, what biases and emerge and gaps emerge when these relationships are created, and what kinds of unexpected connections might be made.